Greetings, beautiful souls. Come with me to a land of imagination. It's your favorite author, Lisa Walker McCrae, with another enchanting story time from the pages of my novel, A Peculiar Kind of Love. Remember, you guys, this video is for entertainment purposes only. First, y'all know what it is. Big praise to the Most High Yah, and a shout out to my hearers and listeners. Thank you all for your time and support. I really hope these story times are keeping you guys entertained. So, with that love being shown, are y'all ready to fuel those imaginations and turn some pages? Awesome! Charnsey, why don't you set the stage? Okay, my faithful earlanders, quick recap from our last visit into our imaginations. Thanks to Gabe, we got to know the Fillmores a little bit better, some of Drew's guests at the B&B. Unfortunately, we found out they lost a son when he was about Gabe's age. Fortunately, Gabe's encounter with Betty brought her comfort and a more optimistic way to deal with Jacob's passing. Let's just hope she keeps those words of encouragement close to her heart. Then we have Carl, who was taken in by Lorraine. Baby, Judy quickly put that to bed, asking Carl to stay away from her. Although Carl didn't want to after putting his Mac Daddy vibes down on Lorraine, he complied out of respect for Drew. Speaking of Drew, guess who received a call from Marcus? Yes, our boy has reached out. Now, Drew didn't say much when he called, but she did accept the call. For Marcus, that was fuel that he needed to keep the fire burning. Although his cellmate Chad tried to get him to see the reality of Drew's absence, all Marcus wanted to do was enjoy the moment he got to hear her voice. Which brings us to the soothing sound of Drew's voice, roaring out, calling for Gabe. This was her third call and he still hadn't responded. Drew headed down the hallway to the playroom. Midway, Betty and Gabe emerged. Betty quickly apologized, informing Drew she and Gabe had been so busy playing they didn't hear her call. Yes, Auntie Drew, we've been having a good time, and Miss Betty's not scared of Leonard like you are. Drew cringed, thinking about the slithery, slimy reptile. I hope Gabe isn't bothering you. Drew looked down at him with widened eyes. He's not supposed to hassle the guests. She then poked his dimple. Miss Betty assured he wasn't a bother, but an angel in disguise. Gabe looked up at Betty and smiled. He loved all the attention. Betty then went on to tell Drew he reminded her of Jacob, her late son. Drew gasped, clutching her heart from the unexpected reveal. She took Betty's hand for some touch therapy. I'm so sorry to hear that, Betty. Betty hurried to swallow the tears, informing Drew it'll be 8 years tomorrow, and it never seemed to get easier. Drew told Betty about the Tates losing Sean, the pain they endured, the obstacles they faced, and the courage not to fold but to overcome his death. This seemed to console Betty, knowing that someone else went through the same thing but conquered their hurt. Betty looked down at Gabe, caressing his face. She spoke. Losing a child can really put injury on a marriage. At that moment, Drew understood why the Fillmores were there. She couldn't help but feel sorry for them. So, to keep their minds off Jacob's death, Drew agreed with Seth to let Gabe stay until they were gone. Looking down at Gabe, she asked, how about you spend a few days with Auntie Drew? Gabe didn't have to say a word. His actions said them for him. Gabe jumped up and down with excitement. The precious soul was overjoyed, for Gabe had grown fond of Betty. Yes, Miss Betty, I can stay. Now let's go play. Gabe grabbed Betty's hand, dragging her back to the playroom. Drew laughed, wishing Betty good luck. She knew Gabe would have her in the playroom all day, playing a game of cops and robbers or reenacting scenes from the Toy Story. Drew knew this all too well, being one of Gabe's designated playmates. The evening passed and the night slept. It was the next day and the Fillmores had been at the B&B 3 days now. Their stay had been pleasant from what Drew could see. She could also see the Fillmores struggling with the morning as she looked out at them amongst the swinging kitchen doors, sitting at the breakfast table talking amongst themselves. Today made another year their son Jacob had been gone. Drew tried her best to make the Fillmores as comfortable as possible by starting their day off with a nourishing home-style breakfast. She'd whipped up some chicken fried steak and gravy, eggs, grits, hash brown, biscuits, and pecan pie. Drew encouraged the Fillmores to take the day to relax and reconnect, and that's just what they did. Still in conversation, the Fillmores noticed Gabe entering the breakfast room wrapped in his Toy Story pajamas. The Buzz Lightyear house shoes he wore guided him over to the table. With each step Gabe took, Buzz Lightyear yelled out, "To infinity and beyond!" The sweet soul was barely awake. Woody swung loosely in his hand as he rubbed the night sleep from his eyes. "Good morning, Gabe. How's my buddy?" Betty rubbed his back. Gabe returned the greeting. "Good morning, my Betty." Larry smiled. He was taken in by Gabe's innocence, and the way he walked in all groggy, this reminded him of Jacob. "Good morning, Gabe," Larry greeted. "My wife has told me a lot about you." He then shook Gabe's hand. "Miss Betty told me a lot about you, too. Did you know she's lonely and cries a lot?" "Gabe!" Drew yelled out, emerging from the swinging kitchen doors with a breakfast platter in hand. She apologized to the Fillmores, explaining Gabe was a very outspoken kid. Drew then scolded Gabe, informing him what he said wasn't polite. With no hesitation, Betty ran to his defense. She told Drew it was okay, and Gabe was just going off her conversation in tears about Jacob. "He meant no harm," Betty assured. "Yeah, but he needs to learn discretion," Drew replied, eyeing Gabe. "Discretion," Gabe yelled out, storing the word in his head. The Fillmores and Drew laughed. Drew started tickling Gabe. She then took him by the hand. "Let's see about getting those teeth brushed while I teach you about discretion," she chuckled. "Baby Gabe quick with it, ain't it?" Anywho, a few hours passed. Larry and Betty were now sitting on the deck enjoying the country scenery. All Betty could do was talk about Gabe. Larry loved the way his wife's face lit up when she talked about the boy. He could see Betty simply adored Gabe. This made Larry want to give her another child even more. Larry always felt if him and Betty had another child, it would fill the void they had for Jacob. The only thing was, Betty refused to have any more children, taking her birth control faithfully every night. Gazing at his wife, Larry could see tears gathering. He took Betty's hand, knowing a memory of Jacob was resting on her heart. "Larry, I miss Jacob so much. The more I try not to think about him, the more I do." Betty looked into Larry's eyes. "When will this pain stop?" she asked. Larry wiped the tears from Betty's eyes, remaining silent. Betty went on to say, "It seemed like the pain had gotten worse, sometimes unbearable." Larry stood. Walking over to the deck's railing, he looked out over the lake. The young man didn't want his wife to see his tears. Not only was Larry still hurt behind Jacob's death, but the guilt of not being the supportive husband he should have been was also eating at him. When Betty needed Larry the most, he found comfort in another woman, which almost led to their divorce. Larry cleared his throat, swallowing the tears. "We're gonna be okay, Betty," he assured. Betty shook her head. She needed more from Larry. He always left her confused when it came to his feelings about Jacob. She didn't understand why Larry wouldn't release the hurt. Often Betty would find Larry in Jacob's room, going through his toys or smelling some of his clothes. But never had Betty seen him cry, not even at the funeral. Betty walked over to Larry on a mission to bring him comfort, but he quickly rejected her, claiming he needed to get a workout in. Larry left Betty on the deck with her thoughts. By this time, the Tates were walking in, calling out for Drew. They didn't get a response. Ma Tate called out again, trying to remember if she told Drew they'd be back from Africa today or tomorrow. Still, there was no response from Drew. Brenda suggested her and Joe split up to search the B&B in hopes to find Drew or a clue that would give them insight on where Drew was. They were kinda starting to worry. The Tates didn't agree with Drew living in a home alone, running a business that housed strangers. They told her plenty of times to at least get some cameras, but Drew refused. She said getting cameras wouldn't allow her guests to feel relaxed and at home. See, I'd had cameras in every corner, you hear me? Anywho, after her search of the B&B, Brenda went over to the French doors and did a quick sweep of the backyard when she saw Betty sitting alone on the deck. Brenda quickly went to inquire of Drew's whereabouts from the young lady. "Hello there," Brenda greeted, introducing herself. She then asked Betty Drew's whereabouts. Betty informed Brenda Drew had to make a store run for some supplies and would be right back. Brenda sighed. "I've said to that girl 1,000,000 times, get some help." Brenda was now fussing. Betty laughed. "You must be Drew's mother," she asked. Brenda blushed. She told Betty she was not Drew's mother, but she was like a daughter to her. "A daughter that needs a chewing out for leaving her guests alone," Brenda voiced. Brenda gave Betty a humble smile. She could tell the young lady had been crying. "It's fine," Betty reassured, explaining that Drew asked her and Larry, which was her husband, to keep an eye on things till her and Gabe got back. Brenda was now shaking her head with disappointment. No, we didn't mind," Betty assured. "Drew is such a sweet lady, and she's been more than good to us. So has Gabe." Brenda was pleased to hear such a favorable report. "Well, I guess I'll just have to wait for her." She asked Betty would it be okay if she shared the deck with her. By this time, Joe had completed his search, and just like Brenda, he came up empty-handed, so he struck out to find his wife. That's when he heard the clinking of metal coming from the exercise room. Joe went to investigate, hoping to find Drew. "Nope, that ain't Drew," Joe said to self, walking over, tapping Larry on his shoulder. "Excuse me, young man, have you seen the owner of this place?" he asked. Larry jumped, pulling the earbuds from his ear. Joe had startled him. "Excuse me, sir," Larry asked. Joe explained he was looking for the owner, Drew McCain. Larry told Joe the same thing Betty told Brenda. "That girl," Joe shook his head, observing the weights Larry benched. Joe took a quick trip down memory lane, recalling his days in the gym. He then began to tell Larry about his glory days when he could bench press 300 pounds. Larry was impressed. He could tell by Joe's statue he'd done a little lifting in his day. Larry also found Joe hilarious when he demonstrated how he used to dominate the weights. "Well, it looks as though the Fillmores are in the right place at the right time. All I can say is these are the workings of Yah, in the fictional world and also in a non-fictional world." Unfortunately, you guys, this concludes our story time for now. Be sure to join me back here at Imagination Station for another tantalizing story time where we'll get deeper into these conversations with the Fillmores and the Tates to see what jewels they hold. Until then, take care of the blessings rewarded to you from the Most High. That shows Him appreciation. Yah bless this reading and yourselves. Smooches.